Thanks for coming today. My name is Jett. I'm a vice president here at the FCC. Before we get started, I want to remind you to please silence your phones. And also, I wanted to let you know about a couple of events we have coming up. Things are ramping up for the fall, so be sure to RSVP early for these events. Next Monday, well, first of all, this month, be sure to check out our new wall exhibition, which is focused on Hong Kong's legendary graffiti artist known as the King of Kowloon. In conjunction with that, we'll have a lunch on Monday about the evolving role of Hong Kong in contemporary art, featuring local curators Hilary Wong and Willie Chung. Willie Chung, of course, being the King of Kowloon's chief curator. And then that's Monday. And then next Wednesday, we'll have a lunch with Henry Litton, former judge on the final Court of Appeal. And I also wanted to tell you about a lunch on Wednesday, September 20th. It's a book talk. I don't think we've had one of those in a while. The book is called Digital Empires, The Global Battle to Regulate Technology, and it's by Anu Bradford from Columbia University. So talking about hacking and AI and microchips and all kinds of things. So be sure to look out for those. For today, we're very pleased to welcome Diana Wu David, talking about the future of work in an AI-powered world. Diana is a former Financial Times executive, top 50 global influencer for Future of Work, and author of the best-selling author of Future Proof: Reinventing Work in the Age of Acceleration. Her company, Future Proof Lab, works with boards, CEOs, and senior leaders to navigate complex challenges, drive innovation, and achieve a bold vision for the future. So I'm going to hand it over to you to speak, and I'll ask a couple of questions, and then we'll open it up to the audience. So start thinking about your questions. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Jennifer. So great to be here. Let me have a show of hands first. Who here has been using ChatGPT in the last couple of months? This table over here. Like, if you have any questions, go over here once. Okay. It's good to get a sense. It's such a large topic, but I am just going to try and sort of set us up a little bit for an interesting conversation. So I want to start with a story. And this is the human placebo. This is Brad, the handsome doctor, and he is coming into your room, sadly, to do an EOL. That is end-of-life procedure. As he walks over, he looks at the screen to find out what exactly you have paid for, or your insurance has paid for. So it looks like you've paid for basic bedside manner. And he checks the screen, and he's told that because you have a few days to live based on the computer, he will go and put his hand on your shoulder, but he won't give you a hug because you'd have had to pay extra for that. Sadly, as Brad, handsome doctor, comes over, you realize that when he says hello, his clipboard is upside down. Not a reassuring thing in a doctor. And you ask him, Brad, are you really a doctor? And he said, no, but I did go to acting school. So this is the human placebo. We like to have people take care of us. And this is a fictionalized story from Wired magazine, actually from 2017. Brad is a doctor, quote unquote doctor, who is actually responding to the AI instructions, which have determined, based on all of your data, that you're not going to live that long, so they are starting the end-of-life procedure. He is a trained actor, and his main role is to be the human placebo, the person that will talk to you and make you feel good, etc. So, is that crazy to think that that's going to be the case? It actually, and what a lot of my work is looking at signals to see what's possible in the future. And some of the work that I do is speculative fiction. Let's look at all of the data and the signals and extrapolate out about what's possible. So you can see that actually, Brad is entirely possible. There are signals and trends like the increase in chatbots, The diagnosis and pattern matching, you've probably seen that AI has been competing with doctors to diagnose things in terms of radiology, in terms of diabetes, et cetera. And interestingly, there's increasing comfort with tech. So in around about 2017, Pew had done research that said that actually we don't really want robots taking care of us, but more recent research has shown that we're okay with a little bit of augmentation as long as we still have somebody to place their hand on our shoulder. So what is this about? It really speaks to two things. Our biggest hope, which is that AI will predict the future for us, it will make us superpowered, and crucially, it will give us all the time that we think we want, even though we can't help filling every single minute, even when we do have time. So the big opportunity is that we will be superhuman, and the big fear, of course, is that AI will be superhuman, and we won't actually be a part of that we're going to lose our agency, or we're going to lose our opportunity to work. So it'll give us back our time, and that last one with Kai-Fu Lee, AI 2041, amazing book. He's based in Hong Kong. I highly suggest you read it. And the problem, the downside, is that nobody trusts it, right? So Aristotle talks about 3 aspects of trust, and I look at things through the human lens when I think about humans. And there's the knowledge and expertise aspect. Do we trust AI, or very much right now, generative AI, to have the knowledge and expertise? Well, you've probably heard about the open letter in May, where a lot of luminaries and scientists said we have to postpone AI, generative AI, and open AI for 6 months because it's getting ahead of us. We don't have the knowledge and expertise to harness it. These are kind of like milestone moments in the very condensed path of generative AI. The second one is openness and honesty. Like, do we trust it? And this is Joan is Awful from Netflix, which is a Black Mirror episode where, in fact, Joan turns out to be, her whole life is on Netflix, generated as she's living it, and then is generated kind of the fake version on Netflix. So another one, which in fact is interesting because now we have the Hollywood writers' strike, which is worried about the fact that anything that we can produce can be taken, and I could have an avatar that in a year's time comes and sits with you, and you don't even have to have my permission. And then the third one is concern and care. And so this is an example, a Dutch scandal where they used AI to determine fraudulent claims, and they actually stopped child care benefits to, I think, 23,000 families because it misdiagnosed or misallocated the distributions based on what the AI said was fraudulent claims. So a whole bunch of people didn't get their benefits. And then I think based on broadening it from AI is this perpetual sense that we're trying to keep up with a future that is perpetually going forward at a greater speed. So one of the key aspects of, in particular, generative AI is the fact that as a consumer technology, its adoption rate was faster than any previous technology and more adopted in a more mass way. Maybe just once, as in the gentleman in the first row, but that's something that people are starting to get concerned about. So what are some of the big themes to think about in your individual life and in your work? One is value creation in industry. So Goldman Sachs predicts that 300 million jobs will be lost, but there's going to be 7 trillion in additional value. So there's OpenAI, for instance, predicts that 80% of all US jobs will be affected in some way by generative AI. Maybe that's, they're doing it, so sort of self-serving. And that 50% will be impacted by 20% or more. So the basic message is every job that we have is going to be affected. And then there's some real tangible aspects of industries. So you see the Hollywood writers' strike. People are striking because they worry that they will be disintermediated, that the writing that I do will be able to be scraped, and somebody, not like my writing's so good, but somebody can say, do an article in the voice of Diana David, or more to the point, rewrite a Netflix script in the style of Christopher Nolan. So people are really worried. A lot of the media are also suing because so much of the training data is based on the past. So if you're going to write a news article, then it's based on the fact that it's ingested all of the news articles potentially that have ever been written in order to do a new one. So that's industry. And I mean, this is also, we're talking about AI, big A, big I. The latest is really generative AI, but this is not new, right? When I was at FT, we talked about they were already using machine learning to do earnings reports, like plus 15% equals an exceptional year or whatever. So for those of you who are thinking about it from the leadership perspective or at work, there's the value creation within industry. And that is really interesting. And for me, because I work with people, but also a lot of companies, the interesting thing is that there are studies showing that it's transforming the way that we think about value at work. And what it's doing is upgrading the normals. And there's Stanford and MIT, which just studied their research on customer service. And they said there's a 14% increase in basically the lowest level performers. So it helps a lot. If you can think about it, if you're not really sure what to say or you're not really sure what to write, being able to use ChatGPT or some kind of machine learning to prompt you or write it for you is really amazing. You all of a sudden can learn faster and produce faster. The other thing is it cuts down onboarding. So all the new people get up to speed faster. And the other interesting thing is the very high performing people are kind of giving the training data. So their value is really high, but generally in an organization, you're going, thank God, the people who are new are up to speed faster, but the people who are really smart and the knowledge capture that's happening is not being rewarded. And as you think about compensating people, you're like, gee, well, do we compensate people more because now they're 14% more productive with AI? How do we compensate the people that are training the data? So it's been like mind-blowing for companies I work with to think about how they'll introduce it and what that means for the value creation we make at work. So in the media industry, they're thinking about, for instance, if it doesn't really matter, let's say in the old days, you had to find somebody who writes really well, just a clever way with words. If that doesn't matter because ChatGPT can write in the style of Financial Times or the Lex column, then maybe who we're hiring might change. Maybe it doesn't matter to find the best writer. Maybe it matters to find the person in Indonesia with some interesting ideas and some good access that doesn't necessarily write well. So that kind of conversation is also taking place. And then, of course, in an organization, the big fear is that, a big commercial person will go, oh, excellent. We don't need good writers, so let's just hire the cheapest people and have ChatGPT fill in the rest, because it's certainly an opportunity. Then value creation for self. And I think that as individuals, people are thinking, could AI replace me? But if it's not going to, A, how can I make sure it doesn't? And B, how can I actually get more time or creative nudges or can I only focus on the fun parts? There's a Nobel Prize-winning economist, Pistorides, who said, ChatGPT is going to make sure that we can ditch all the boring parts and only focus on the fun parts of our job. So thinking about the value you create has been interesting, even for me as a speaker, as a consultant, because I can't just, have ChatGPT do all my slides. I have to think about what could be interesting above and beyond, either the storytelling or the way that things are done. And even the way that you derive your own income can change. So it's, probably a tangent too far, but tokenization of your content and copyright law is evolving so that maybe if I do this presentation and Carmen decides to use it later with modifications and do a big speaking engagement where she gets paid a lot of money, maybe because it's been tokenized, I'll get a little bit of royalty for some of my new ideas that she used in her presentation. And you can kind of see where that could go. If I write an article and then somebody references it or uses part of it, those are the kind of conversations that we're having. So now what? I think that for now, you guys are okay, but this side of the room, we can talk about the first option, which is, nah, it's not happening. I don't need to use it, whatever. And that has certainly been happening, right? I know for those of you guys paying attention, at one point HKU banned it. They said, nobody's going to use ChatGPT. And the reality is that you can't in Hong Kong, without a bit of extra work, get onto the OpenAI website. But there are a lot of opportunities to use it with different apps. It's being embedded in so many apps. And even HKU finally decided that they were going to give everybody an opportunity to use some of it, but through Microsoft. So they had that veneer of control. And over time, that's what you're seeing much more of, where there's this intermediary layer where at this point, Google, all the big people, and a lot of small apps as well, are being powered by AI. And you can have an article or a memo you wrote and then push a button and it creates a slideshow for you. So there's a million different things on the market we don't have to go through. But I think that I would suggest that the best way to keep up is by playing. So to give you an example, this is something that came out, I think, last week or the week before. It is absolutely impossible to give you an up-to-the-minute kind of approach to generative AI, but this was text with Google, and you can kind of see where you could use it, depending on what you're doing. They have something called simile, which to me feels a little bit like the thesaurus or even what you could get on the internet. So I typed in foreign correspondent to simile, and it came back with some interesting prompts. A battered suitcase filled with clothes that have been worn and washed many times. Is anybody a foreign correspondent in the room? A camera with a broken lens. So if you're doing creative writing, maybe it's kind of, oh, cool, scene setting. A reporter interviewing a refugee who has just fled their home country. The smell of sweat and body odor. So who knows which one is true? Whatever is true for your particular thing. I think that these kind of prompts are really, can be interesting or charming and funny. They have another one called Unexpected, where you can stick in foreign correspondent, and it said, a foreign correspondent who is a giant panda who can speak 13 languages. I personally don't, I never think of those kind of things, probably my kids do. But like, if you really feel like you are doing something, putting together something, and want that creative nudge or this kind of left field prompt, it can be really interesting. And what works for text works for images. I did a story on Hong Kong 2050 and put into DALL-E and Midjourney some of the images. Hong Kong 2050, it was about DNA and dim sum. And you can imagine that those are even more amazing as you think about the unexpected images that can come out of it. So that's a little, chomp through of the AI landscape and generative AI landscape right now. If any of you guys have any questions, let's have an interesting conversation.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I'll start off with a couple. We had another AI-themed event here yesterday. It was a breakfast talk with Jack Lau and Sophia Chang. And they talked a bit about some of the limitations of AI and what it can't do right now. And I was wondering if you could tell us a bit about that and what's a realistic timeline for when AI will have this impact on jobs that you referenced.
I think it's already having an impact on jobs, absolutely. You guys have maybe seen IBM has decided to stop hiring for some of their positions and has instead invested into OpenAI. I think it was about $235 million at a valuation of $4.5 billion. So they're already starting to say, no, I don't need anybody. And the different companies that I see, some of them are saying, here's low-hanging fruit. Like, we're not going to hire anybody else in marketing. My own small company, I'm looking at it and thinking, wow, we don't have to hire anybody. We don't have to hire the copywriter. We don't have to hire somebody to do the videos. Like, all of the marketing that we might have outsourced, we can now do in-house. And so that aspect, that in a way I see that that's happening now, and that we'll go through that low-hanging fruit as people start thinking about augmentation and like, okay, well, we don't have to do that, but how can we then pair that with human ingenuity and then catapult it to something really extraordinary? And, like protein folding, which is truly astonishing. Like the sort of amount of research and the amount of data crunching that you can get, and then take that and have a human being consider what to do with it or how to engineer those next iterations, I think is amazing. But in a way, it's good. Like, the limitations are it hallucinates. I have to update my board bio, and I thought, wonder what would happen if I just said, here's my website, do a board bio, and it was really good, but like none of it was true. So half of it was true. So having a human being to go, I would have liked to work at McKinsey, but I didn't, is useful. And those are the guardrails.
That kind of leads me into my next question, which is more focused on journalism. Based on what you're saying, what I'm hearing as a journalist is that I should spend less time writing and more time going for drinks with people to build out my source network.
Is that you said that? That could be a personal preference.
But it's interesting what you said about, access and ideas becoming more valuable than some of those harder skills, I guess. And you also mentioned that media companies have already been experimenting for years with auto-generated stories about earnings reports or, like sports games. Can you tell us anything about how successful those experiments have been and how widely are they being used right now?
So there have been a number of media companies that have said, okay, especially the ones that do less long-form reporting, where they've said, okay, let's start to generate a lot of articles via ChatGPT, and we'll put them out there and we'll see what happens. And the problem is that when you start doing that, anybody can do that. And I think that Bloomberg has been working on something. Anybody from Bloomberg here? No? They've been working on kind of taking their own data so that they can have proprietary sourcing to generate the articles. But by and large, it's really difficult to compete if everything is based on the same ChatGPT. Like, you don't really have any barriers. And I think it's not just ChatGPT, but over time, certainly at Financial Times, we thought, okay, let's do deep sourced reporting. And maybe it's not drinks every night at the FCC, although I highly encourage you guys all to do that. But it's the interviewing, the human connection, the finding the source that didn't look like it was interesting at first, but you just had a hunch about it. I think that is true, that those things, like in the perfect world, you spend a lot of time being able to do that versus before when you're thinking, oh gosh, I wish I had more time to do all this deep reporting, but I don't because I have a deadline and we just don't, there's only so much time in the day.
And another question that came up yesterday, this talk is about the future of work, but for people who aren't even starting to work yet, for people here who have kids, for example, what should their kids study or how should they prepare for a future where AI is going to play such a huge role?
As the mother of 3 teenagers, I think about that a lot, and I think one of the things is just that AQ, right, your adaptability quotient. How can you think about a world in which everything will change? And the reality is that whatever major you choose is probably not that important. It's more about how you can continue to learn over time and be adaptable. So that's one of the things I would say. And then the human potential aspect of the AI is that I think that is the soft skills, thinking about what kind of relationships can I develop, what kind of ability do I have to talk to other human beings and really listen to them and develop trust and do all the things that AI can't do in whatever field you choose to go in. So developing that, which is very transferable across the mosaic of your career, and then continually keeping up with what else is advanced technology bringing to my field or my work. And that's going to be forever for my kids and the next generation. I think they're going to have to think about how am I going to ingest and metabolize all this new information that's coming my way.
Okay, let's open it up to questions, starting here. And please identify yourself and any organization.
Sure. My name's Mark. I'm from an agency called Cedar. Really interesting talk. Thank you for sharing your insights. I was interested in that last part about what a career looks like in this kind of new world, and I guess I'd be interested in your thoughts on what a kind of career does start to look like when you've got, I guess in the traditional world, so much is based on the job learning. You've kind of learned through 20, 30 years working with other colleagues who are taking you the next step of the way. In that world where a lot of the bottom end stuff is kind of helped by machines and AI, and you've got the high achievers, how do people progress their careers? How does that kind of go through and bridge the gap over 30, 40, 50 years?
So that's a lot of what my book was about. In this kind of perpetual change, accelerating change, what do you need to think about for careers? And so thinking about what your through line is, what your focus is, and being more grounded in terms of thinking, okay, instead of one career for life, I'm part of the generation that said, okay, I'm going to go to school and then I'm going to get a great job and then I'm going to be taken care of and I'll retire sometime. And that's, for me, I don't think that's possible. So I wrote the book because there were so many people, kind of Gen X and millennial, that were saying, oh my gosh, my career is going to be 60 years long. The upside is I can take time off and it's still going to be there. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And a lot of the work that I have done is about, okay, how do you reframe it from a linear to something that's either like a mosaic where you put a few more tiles on and the picture changes, or a kaleidoscope where you have the same general elements, but you turn the wheel and suddenly it's another beautiful picture that you didn't anticipate. And I see that again and again where people are reinventing themselves. And I have a ton of stories in the book about people who, were COO of a big global investment bank and then decided, oh my gosh, I'm like 40, 45, like this is as good as it's going to get in this role. Like, what do I do now? And then focusing on how to develop experimentation muscles and how to focus so that there is that through line and you don't feel like you're going, I don't know, maybe I'll be a baker next from an investment banker. I think that kind of self-management and career agency and flexibility is great. I feel excited about the opportunity, but it's also hard and not something that the education system is necessarily preparing anybody for. Companies are kind of already thinking about it. They're doing skills-based hiring. They're going, we don't really care that your job description was X. We care about the 55 little pieces that went up into that. Micro-credentials are doing that. You take something on Coursera and it becomes part of your LinkedIn profile and you're getting hired based on that. So I would say that's the way that I see careers going forward.
Other questions? Okay. One question that I have is just about AI generally, because I feel like a year ago we were barely talking about this, and this year especially it really burst onto the scene. And as you said, ChatGPT has been adopted by so many people so quickly compared to other consumer tech. So why are we talking about AI so much all of a sudden, or why does it feel that way? And why do you think ChatGPT was adopted by so many people so quickly?
Because it's really useful. I mean, I feel like we live in a bubble in Hong Kong because we can't easily get on to the early iterations of OpenAI. It's not available in Greater China, and there have been no equivalents for consumer technology in China because Baidu and Tencent are doing their things. They're focused on business. There's been certain laws and regulations that have made it, not available on a broad basis. So everybody piled in like we all do for a new technology, or at least I do. And it was actually, like, it saves a huge amount of time. It saves maybe not a huge amount of money for my business. I just could not believe like how much time it saved for us to feed a video of, say, this masterclass type thing into a video editor and have it come up with the perfect 30-second clip. And it wasn't great the first time. And so if you can think about, oh my gosh, I'm terrible at video editing anyway, so probably take me 3 hours, but all of a sudden it transformed the potential of my personal business in a very short period of time. And so I think that that's why people were like, I get this immediately. Like, I do a TikTok video and I'm going, oh, well, it's kind of cute or fun, but this is like, wow, it's like I just hired 3 more people. And it's also fun. So for people who are playing around with it, you can see that it's effective. In Hong Kong, not as many people are using it because it has been not allowed. And so we're using it with this intermediary software with apps or chats or whatever, and it's not the full-powered machine. So I think that it is really useful. It's gone beyond the hype of, oh, you're doing it? Oh, I better get on too, to, okay, this is really either really useful, or you can see how it's going to transform the conversation. It's all generative AI. I think it's kind of peaking too, because now everybody's seen it and the people are like, yeah, whatever, I'll read a book. But it will continue to start to accelerate on a business basis because it has just barely caught on in big businesses to start penetrating. Most big businesses are like, you 10, you're allowed, and then others are really worried. But once that happens, oh my God, it's going to really be huge.
Other questions from the audience? Yeah, Adam? And then we'll go over here.
Hello, my name's Adam. I'm also from an agency called Cedar. I wanted to ask about, I guess specifically generative AI, but maybe how that sort of extrapolates onto sort of business cases of that. And what we've read and know about sort of inherent racial and geographic biases that AI at least currently have. If that's a concern for you, if you think that's something that gets sort of kind of blinded out as AI grows and is better sourced, or if we just end up in this universe where we're just perpetuating kind of the worst versions of ourselves, and especially in the workplace.
Yeah, it's a great question because so many of the derailers for in particular, generative AI and the precursors to that, the chatbots and stuff, most of those projects were derailed because of the problems with bias, or generally bias and maybe some bad behavior. And so it's interesting because the great thing about being in Hong Kong, I feel like, is that we're sitting there watching a lot of the US and the Western world play around with OpenAI and say, okay, 20% of this is going to be crap, or maybe it's going to be bias, or whatever it is. And then we have, the dictate from mainland China of, yes, we want this to be healthy. I think that's some of the conversation about it. Like, we want this to be aligned with values. And in a way, what they're saying is, we don't want, they have explicitly said we don't want bias against ethnicity and racial and et cetera, age. And so we're going to see those two play out. And I'm really curious because it's just been really difficult to take all of the stuff that's gone before and say, now disregard the fact that we've been biased for 10,000 years of data you just ingested and try to place certain guardrails on it. People are trying to, but a number of companies that I know have had projects where they just couldn't figure it out. Like for interviewing, for instance, the way that people for jobs, the way that people were assessing interviews based on the AI algorithm ended up being biased. They scrapped the whole program. There's another program, for instance, that will look at your Zoom interview or talk and give you feedback on how much bias you're using in your language. So I think it's not something I have an easy answer to, but it is one of the biggest challenges and maybe opportunities as we go forward.
We had a question over here.
Thanks. Hi, my name is Winnie Pan. I'm just an ordinary FCC member, not a journalist, not a correspondent. I'd like to hear your thoughts about how you see the regulatory world, regulatory landscape for AI evolving, and how that's going to affect the new AI world. In particular, like we talk about the data sets that you feed to train the model, and how do we make sure that it is objective and it's comprehensive, and also the authenticity of information, which is already a problem now with the prevalence of the internet. And how do we, and with the ChatGPT and AI, it's going to be magnified, the problem of the inauthenticity of information. So how do you see the regulatory world evolving? I'd hear your thoughts on that. Thanks.
Well, I think that the regulations are kind of struggling to keep up. And so some people say, let's regulate it now. And like any new technology, it's like, okay, we need to regulate it. This is going out of control. And then other people are like, you're squashing innovation. So I think I see that interplay, happening as we go forward. But I don't see it being very easy because I don't think that there are a lot of people that, well, first of all, there's competition between countries, right? So that's also the context. You don't want it to not go forward because what if, X other country has a leap, and US and China have been in the press a lot as, the AI wars. That said, I think that there will be some regulation because you do have things like the May 10th letter where you have scientists who are saying like there needs to be some guardrails. companies are already applying those guardrails. Aside from the ones that are creating the AI, companies are worried about reputation enough that they're probably on the conservative side. But in terms of regulation, I just think it's super hard for regulators to keep up, because you can see now there's a lot of lawsuits happening, and so that, that in a way the legal landscape for AI has gotten ahead of regulation so much that I think that some of that will kind of come back and inform what's happening, like using AI to develop all your court briefs, which is something that happened, and they were very compelling, but they were not true. So like, where does the duty of care lay in that instance? And copyright law is fascinating as people say, okay, so to whom does the copyright belong to? The person who did the prompt engineering based on your article or whatever it is. It's really a scramble.
Yes, question here.
Hi, Diana. Thank you so much for taking this time. From what you're saying, there obviously, we need to find the right balance between squashing innovation and also developing human potential. Are there any best practice examples or companies that you've seen that's done this really, really well? And what have they been doing?
So that's a great question. Thanks, Carmen. I think the companies are doing a couple of different things. Some are ring fencing, and they're trying to have a few people who they feel have the capability to understand more and translate whatever AI's promises to the business. And that's like old school innovator's dilemma. It's like New York Times circa 1995, let's put 5 guys, let's not have them in the New York Times headquarters in New York, let's ring fence them, and because otherwise they'll just be crushed by the bureaucracy. You still have that. The other option, which I've seen, for instance, WeLab in Hong Kong, it's a digital bank, and they said, you know what, we actually want to see what's going to happen if everybody is allowed to use it, but interestingly, the legal department there said, oh, that's going to be difficult. So they were going to send out this note that was like, don't do this, don't do that, and it was very legalese. And actually, the people in senior management said, actually, let's just rephrase that a little bit. Let's say this is an opportunity. Of course, we don't want to have any of our data put onto a public platform, but anything else that's not, proprietary data on the platform, any customer information going into OpenAI, et cetera, is fair game. And furthermore, we're going to take this experiments that you do, and we're going to have a process to feed back so that we can actually figure out what's working, because people at the top of companies haven't the slightest idea. So that risk management aspect of saying, okay, how do we approach this in a way that allows us to experiment in a limited fashion and a widespread way, maybe not in every department, and then aggregate that information so that we're a learning, experimenting organization. Those are the people I've seen who, it's probably at this point just a personal preference. It's not like they've done it. We've seen amazing things happen. Everybody's still like trying to figure it out. But to me, that's an interesting approach.
I think we have time for one last question. There are any others? All right, well, I'll finish then by asking, you mentioned US and China. Have you had any experience working with Baidu's new chatbot or the others that have come out? Or where do you see that going in terms of China's development of AI? And then also, are there any final thoughts you wanted to end with?
Yeah, I think that from the perspective of kind of the people in the room, I haven't been on it because I don't have a tremendous need to go on, but and it's only open specifically for businesses, and they're trying to have very narrow kind of, they're doing the, okay, let's have a few people try this out in a limited and controlled basis and see where it goes. And so, you know, those two approaches, in a way, are what I think is most fascinating. And for people in this room, you know, go out and play and have fun with it and think about how it can be used in your organizations and what it means for the future of work. But then also just having a ringside seat to say, gee, is one of these approaches going to be better or worse? You know, what can we learn from the controlled approach versus the Lone Ranger approach or cowboy approach? And, you know, and how will those then interact in the future? Like, to me, in a way, it's a little bit more of a thought experiment. I do expect that China's been a bit quiet on the generative AI. I mean, focused on more of the other aspects of AI that are more deep tech. But I do expect at some point that you'll see something related to generative AI that's been a little bit more fully baked come out and probably be surprising and far more advanced. And you know, people will look up and go, huh, wow, I didn't even know it could do that. So that's what I would forecast for the future.
And any final takeaways on AI?
It's really transformative, and I think that if you're thinking about ways that you can use it and work with it, I'm happy for you to exchange cards. And it is difficult to figure out. My advice, really, at least based on my own personal preference, has been all of this advanced tech, the tokenization, the AI, et cetera. Like, how does it map to human values, right? It's always new tech, same humans. And so when I think about, like, oh my gosh, there's this and that and the other, like, it's kind of my job to pay attention to advanced technology. But what grounds me is to think, how does this affect trust? How does this affect relationships? How does this affect career trajectories? You know, how does this affect leadership? And those kind of very human elements is what I think is really grounding and can be helpful as you go forward and think, what do I need to actually pay attention to? And then think about, how does that affect me in my life?
Well, this has been great. Thank you so much. I'm definitely more interested in ChatGPT than I have been, so I'm definitely going to check that out.
Okay. I'll be expecting a lot of emails or text messages that are on ChatGPT. I've already had Hugo promise me that he would do his thank you note email.
Oh, that should be fun.
On ChatGPT. So thank you very much.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming.
Thanks.